All right, we are live. Jason, go ahead and take it away.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining. This is the first ZOMG-ZIP 1014 Independent Review Committee meeting. My name is Jason McGee. I go by a quiet investor on the forum. I'm a Zcash community member and also a current ZOMG candidate running for the next term, and I'll serve as a moderator for these discussions. Some background. Over the past couple months, there have been a number of issues brought up related to how ZOMG is currently structured. Specifically, Chris Berninsky brought up that the current time commitment of 5 hours per month was too little and needed to be increased, along with a corresponding increase in pay. He also brought up the need for committee members to hire contractors for operational and administrative support. ML brought up that ZOMG's relationship with the Zcash Foundation has been challenging. She echoed Chris's concerns about the time commitment and pay and said there's a need to hire and direct support. And the Zcash Foundation has put together a plan to address some of these issues. So the purpose of this committee is to get all the relevant stakeholders together and review and try to resolve some of the issues that have been brought up in a collaborative and constructive manner, and then amend ZIP 1014 accordingly. Ideally, we'll have meetings bi-weekly, but we'll work out the scheduling offline. A few things before we start. First off, we want these meetings to be open and transparent, so they'll be live streamed for the community to attend and recorded and available for replay. If you have strong views on any of the topics we discuss and want to be included as a panel member, reach out to me on the forum and let me know. Also, the last 10-15 minutes will be a QA session, so if you have any questions or comments, please post them in the chat box. Second, Zcash Foundation's, ECC's, and ZOMG's participation in this group does not constitute an endorsement of the committee or any ideas it puts forth. You can think of it as a working group. Lastly, a proposal to amend ZIP 1014 can be made independent of this group. What that means is anyone can put forward a proposal to amend ZIP 1014 for consideration, and it'll go through the standard Zcash governance process. So today I want to pick up where we left off in the forum discussions and focus on the plan put forth by the Zcash Foundation and determine whether or not it sufficiently addresses the issues Chris and ML brought up. The way I see it, there's three major points to the Foundation's plan. Hours have been increased from 5 per month to 15 per month, and there was a corresponding pay increase from 500 per month to 1,500 per month. Second, the Zcash Foundation has actively increased support for ZOMG committee members. There's two pieces to this. First, they hired the Ecosystems Relationship Manager to support ZOMG by providing a single point of contact for grant applicants throughout the grant lifecycle, to serve as liaison between ZOMG and grant recipients, and to proactively seek out and evaluate grant applicants. Second, the Foundation also created a request for information, or RFI, process for additional support, which is like a paid contractor engagement to assist ZOMG members assess the technical aspects of grant proposals or advise on other issues. Lastly, the new committee members will serve 4 months, and then after which Jack will ask them to vote on whether or not they're happy with the existing structure. If a majority of the committee votes no, the Zcash Foundation will consult the community on the best way forward. So my first question to the panel is the increase in hours from 5 to 15 hours a month sufficient? One of the biggest challenges ZOMG has faced is finding high quality grant proposals. I think more needs to be done with regard to aggressively tapping into Zcash's and this crypto spaces network to find high quality people and teams to apply for grants. This in itself is a full-time job, and it's really ZOMG marketing itself, as I think Zooko said in one of the threads. And I think that the committee members are best equipped for this role. Also, ZOMG is new, and I think there should be more focus on researching how it should be operated and structured for long-term success. And what that means is researching the best practices by looking at other similar grant-making organizations like the Ethereum Foundation, also understanding how to scale ZOMG for when the price of ZEC increases by 100x. And additionally, considering whether or not ZOMG should be moved offshore because it has too much exposure to US regulatory risk. I don't think anybody's focused on these issues now, and these things need to be done, and it's best to have a plan in place in advance. And I think ZOMG committee members may best be suited for it. So perhaps a potential solution to this would be to have 1 or 2 committee members work more than the required 15 per month, and even up to 20 to 40 hours per week if needed. So since we don't have a lot of time today, I'd like to focus specifically on the question or on the questions. And in order to keep the discussion forward-looking and constructive, I think, for today, we not focus too much on things like the history of why ZOMG was structured the way it was, or the intention of ZIP 1014, or creating a DAO. So with that, I'll hand it off to the panel. I think it makes sense to start out with ML or Hudson, since they're both sitting ZOMG committee members.
I
go ahead, Michelle.
so I will let Hudson lead.
I was just about to say, welcome, Michelle. I see you have found the right link. And hi, everyone. Yeah, I'm a current ZOMG member, among a bunch of other blockchain stuff I do. And to answer the question, which I think specifically you were asking, is the 15 hours that was kind of bumped as a, I guess, requirement of sorts and the posting for expectations, is that enough? I think it is. That estimate, though, is somewhat predicated on the Zcash Foundation providing us with support so that we're not having to work full time, and that we're able to use our capacity and networks to our fullest ability without having to be bogged down like it's a full-time job. So that's what the plan is. I don't know if it's going to work or not. So basically, I think the best thing to do is to just take it as, personally, what I'm taking it as, especially since I'm getting reelected, is that's the minimum I'll have to work. I'm expecting that to ebb and flow with number of grants and how much the Zcash Foundation can provide as far as resources for some of the more repetitive tasks and stuff like that. But we would just update our expectations if that changes. So to me, it was something that was a problem that I feel like is being proactively addressed and has a lot of eyeballs on it. ML?
Hey, are we just answering the question? I'm sorry, I took a while.
No problem. Yeah, basically, so Jason kind of laid out the framework.
15-hour.
He just asked the 15-hour question. Was there anything else, Jason, that you wanted, or just to start it?
Well, so the 15 hours is really just for assessing and approving, rejecting grants. But I guess what I'm focusing in on is actively increasing, reaching outreach to find more teams to give grants to, and also, focusing more on what the future of ZOMG is going to look like focusing on how it's structured and how the organization should be run.
Okay, yeah. I think 15 is the bare minimum. I think in an ideal world, it doesn't take that much time, right? It kind of, everything just flows. Everybody knows what they need to do. There's a good framework. But I think as much as the current panel is the inaugural panel, I don't think we've yet set up a good system that can run on maybe 5 hours or just 2-3 hours per week per member. So I think whoever is on the next panel will have to put in a solid amount of work to get it to that state. And I think 15 is also the minimum, assuming everybody puts in 15. Yeah. I think the current panel it's extraordinarily imbalanced, and I think somebody putting in a lot more doesn't make up from somebody not doing much, right? So I think 15 is the bare minimum. I would say is required, but maybe even more if you expect some people to be less engaged and some people to be way more engaged. And I'm talking about quality work, right? Everybody can do a shoddy job in shorter amounts of time.
So do you feel that was part of the issue, that people weren't, well, I guess it was 5 hours per month, so they weren't working 15 hours a month, or if they were, it wasn't, I don't think so.
And I mean, if you just think about, we review a number of grants. Some of them are a lot of them are more complicated than just, saying yes, no, it makes sense. And even just to think about what questions you want to ask the dev, to talk to the dev, to write an email with all the points considered, and then get back their response, like how many hours does that take already? Right? That's the whole week's worth of, or the whole month's worth of 5 hours or more, minus our meetings, minus planning, minus kind of strategic thinking about how we get more quality grants in.
I have a question on that. To what extent the number of applications affects these hours, and would placing a higher bar on the scale of grants with which the ZOMG needs to grapple change the quantitative bottom line?
I think so. I think on the grant side, I think it kind of linearly scales, right? Or maybe we can move into a model where, say, 2 people out of the 5 are responsible for looking at one particular one in detail. So it's not like 5 of us need to do all the same amount of work. We can kind of be smart about it that way. So I think there are ways to avoid this linear scaling of time.
Okay. Does Jack or Alex, you want to add anything?
Yeah, I mean, I had previously kind of conjectured that the number of grants may be an issue, because I think if you got a grant coming in for $10,000, you got a grant coming in for $1 million. The amount of time that you spend as a committee is not going to be 1%. It's going to be closer than that. So one of the ideas that I suggested was that that the ZOMG committee sets some criteria, and that the foundation staff then kind of benchmark or filter incoming applications against those criteria. So, and they can be, they could be minimum amount, it could be, have they ticked all the boxes in terms of have they posted on the forums, have they included milestones, etc. And then, because I feel like low quality applications is likely to suck up a lot of time. And ML, Hudson, feel free to jump in and contradict me here if I'm wrong. But so my thinking there was that if ZOMG establishes the criteria, and then the foundation resources assess incoming grant applications to make sure that they've met those criteria, then that could be one way of taking some of the burden off ZOMG. Now, one of the potential problems with that is that would that in some way compromise the independence of ZOMG's decision making? Like to my mind, that's the thing that must be protected, is that the foundation must not seek to influence or skew or affect the decision making of ZOMG. But I think that if we have sufficient transparency, and we're already pretty transparent, the grants platform is pretty transparent, then it would be pretty obvious if we were kind of nixing grant applications that should, in theory, be getting through.
Yeah, and I would say that, yeah, there's kind of an argument to be had that that the grants, sorry, my brain got like all messed up. So there are the small grants and then the large number of grants. We spend more time probably on like the $1 million grants, just because we do a little more thoroughness on it, to answer that question. And then I like the RFP process that ZOMG, I think it's RFI or RFP, I forgot the acronym at the moment, but basically asking for resources to help with investigating grants. And if we were to get that going, which it looks like we're on the path to do, that's going to alleviate a lot of things in a good way.
Yeah, and if I could just clarify, just to kind of follow up on what Hudson just said. So the intent of the RFI process is to create an expert list of support individuals, companies that can provide expert assistance when necessary for ZOMG. So it's a proactive step to have on-demand, basically, assistance available. The purpose of the RFP process that we've just kind of started talking about is ZOMG identifying a project and then creating an RFP, which goes out and says, who can do this for us? And it's a competitive process between a bunch of individuals or companies who can then respond, and ZOMG would review and award. So it's one kind of tool in the toolkit to increase the quantity and quality of potential grantees. So that's the difference between the two. And we're ready to go on both. It's just, it takes a lot of work on our side. It takes some work on the ZOMG side. So it's just a matter of making the time and getting to it.
If I can pitch in here. So I think there are two ways this committee can do its work. One is the more light touch approach, which is the one that Jack proposed. And I'm honestly right now, I can't decide which one is the best, but let's say if I were to summarize Jack's approach is we're on the committee and we roughly get an intuition over whether we want the grant or not, and then want to approve the grant or not. And then Jack's team will essentially help us make sure that these people are legit, the prices are okay, everything makes sense. So this is one approach which makes it much lighter on the ZOMG. The other approach, which I'm a little bit more leaning towards, because I think it leads to better outcomes and more accountability, is we as committee members, we need to really dig into a project to understand if it is to determine things like the ROI, potential ROI, the value of the project to the entire ecosystem. And I think we can't do this by being too far removed. The work that ZF could continue to support us on would be to validate that developers are good, the price quoted is fair. But then on our part, I think because so many of these projects are emergent, it is hard to understand. We really need to borrow our brain into what's going on and why we should do it. And I think that still takes a significant amount of time. Let me give you an example. The Thorchain grant, it is a point of contention on the forum. We really want to do it, but then there are questions around Thorchain as a project, the quality of the dev team, and the kind of the high price tag it's asking for. So ZF can help us answer those questions. But then we as committee members, I think, to the extent our mandate is look long-term, look out strategically, and help achieve greater ZEC adoption, we then need to go down the rabbit hole of our own kind of thinking, group, like individual and group thinking of why is Thorchain important? Is this the best place? Is this the best way to achieve what we want to achieve with this grant? And all sorts of strategic thinking that is better placed for the people where the buck stops at, which is us, the panel, not ZF. And I think also the community or the CAP who voted these specific members of the panel will also be expecting that kind of thinking and value add from the panelists. So to sum up, I think there is the light touch way, and then there is the not so light touch way. And I don't have a strong inclination towards either, but I feel like the more heavy touch approach would lead to better outcomes.
I think that's right, Michelle. If the right people are on the panel and they have incentives in front of them to put in the work, I'll make an analogy to the way things work. And traditionally, I've worked in the venture space, which is that there's usually a deal partner inside of a venture firm that gets excited about a founder or an idea. And they get it, and they connect with that passion, they understand the opportunity, and they bring that to the partner meeting, usually on a Monday, and they talk about it with the rest of the firm, and they try to get them up to speed on why this is such a big deal and why the firm should be interested in it. And assuming that goes well, and the other partners get on board, the diligence is frequently offloaded to less senior people within the firm. And so what you don't have is the partners chasing up details like, hey, do we have the tax certificate this and the milestones that? You leave that to other folks that can handle that sort of mechanical work. But what you end up with in that paradigm are folks that are the decision makers are highly invested in the founders. So the analogy here would be, rather than sit around and wait for grant applications to show up and then put them through their paces, given that OMG represents the largest share of the dev fund across the entire community, I think we look to OMG. I know I look to OMG to bring some home runs to the plate. And I don't think that's going to happen by sitting around passively waiting for really interesting opportunities to show up.
I just want to say that I think I don't think there's as much distance between those two approaches as you might think. I mean, you know, we the foundation are providing that sort of mechanical support, you know, in terms of doing the KYC, handling all the admin, all that sort of stuff that needs to be done. And I think that there is scope for ZOMG members to you know, talk to potential grant applicants who they think would be able to put a good grant application together. And in terms of the assessment piece, I think that having the RFI process in place may provide a solution to that. I'm not certain, but I think having the ability for ZOMG to say, right, we need, you know, we need someone who can, you know, who's an expert in cross-chain, you know, the issuing assets on or you know, moving Zcash to a different chain. We need someone who understands that space, and we want to, you know, have them consult for ZOMG, provide their expertise, and get paid for it. Then that's what the RFI, you know, mechanism is intended to achieve. So, you know, to be fair, it's new, so we haven't actually had much had a chance to test it out yet. But I'm not sure that there's a huge amount of gap between those two models that you described, ML.
I think it's a time and mentality thing. So I agree. There's, like, if you were to list out differences, there are not many, but I think the kind of amount of work put in by the panelists will be significantly different.
Yeah, one example that I think is notable is the ZOMG, I think ML led this charge, created this document, the white paper that looked at, like, what is the state of the ecosystem? What is the state of capability today for the Zcash product? And where are there gaps and where are there opportunities? And where do we think there's the greatest leverage? And then I think they set this intention to invest in those areas where there's significant opportunity. And that's great. I think that approach is really salient. And I see other projects taking that same approach. Cello just published their, like, here are the things we think we should go invest in as a community, I think last week. But that's got to be a living document. There's got to be somebody whose job it is to always be thinking about that and tracking the state of play across all these different innovations and how they intersect with the Zcash community, and where can we plug in to create the greatest value. So I think that it would be great if that were somebody that were ZOMG. It would be great if it were somebody at ZF, but it needs to happen. And I think one of the things I'm wrestling with here as we talk about, Jason's question was, you know, going from 5 hours a month to 15 hours a month, is it enough? And then ML raised a good point, which was, well, you know, how do you get people to all lean in to the same extent? So if you've got everyone, say we bump it up from 5 to 15 and 5 people get voted in, how do we keep people from sandbagging, and how do we keep people from overexerting and burning out? How do we hold people accountable, essentially, to the expectation? I think Jason also mentioned that perhaps the members of the committee shouldn't all have equal expectation, and that maybe there's a chair type position that has a greater expectation, a greater workload, greater demands, more accountability, and therefore more compensation. I think that seems pretty natural, but I do think that we're trying to balance here. We're trying to figure out how to thread a needle that's quite important, because, like I said, this is the biggest share of the dev fund. There's a real risk of capture by folks that aren't well-intentioned, the folks that are lazy, or folks that don't know what they're doing, that squander this. But then there's also a risk of inaction where we don't swing for the fences and we don't go for the moonshots where there is great opportunity and the potential to create a lot of value. So figuring out how to navigate those trade-offs, I think the responsibility of the community, and that's why I think it's important that we're doing this work here as part of this committee to try to figure out how to sort those trade-offs going forward.
And one option that was suggested on the forums was that if 4 committee members decide that one person isn't pulling their weight, then they can trigger some sort of an expulsion or whatever, and maybe that needs to be looked at, and like it could end up being pretty messy, but maybe if there's a process for having a recall, if the community feels that someone's not pulling their weight or aren't doing the job effectively.
That totally works unless the 4 sandbaggers vote out the one person who's actually doing the job with integrity.
Also, like socially, I wouldn't do it, right? I would just passive aggressively work with that person. So I think it's good in theory, but not actually executable. And I think the solution to that may be just more transparency. I think it'll be obvious to the community who's doing work or not if, I don't know, we hold an AMA every 2 months, or somehow we need to be a little bit more transparent. I think so far some people are able to kind of hide behind, and I'll admit for a couple of weeks at a time, maybe I'm less active either as well. So, I'm guilty as well, to some extent. Not holding it against anybody, but I think if we all had kind of this at the back of our minds, the understanding that we are being watched, then I think it would naturally elicit the ideal behavior.
Jack, what's your thought on having a chair, somebody who works more than the other members?
I think definitely, I think an effective committee needs to have a chair to help pull them together, to help run the meetings and whatnot. Absolutely. And whether that person needs to spend more time, I think is a different question. Like my personal goal for ZOMG is that they turn up for their meetings with a briefing pack that will hopefully take no more than 45 minutes to read, which has got the salient information about the decisions that they need to make. And then they can just discuss. If there are further questions, then they give them to the foundation resources to go and get that information and bring it back, and then that thing gets tabled. But then the other decisions get made. So that and that doesn't cover the actual running of the meeting. But I think definitely having a chair is a good way to run effective meetings. It also, just to acknowledge, doesn't cover this more strategic thinking that Emma was talking about.
Okay, I'll move to the second question. It relates to support, and I think we covered a lot of it with talking about the RFIs. Should ZOMG have a mechanism to support itself independently in limited circumstances, subject to a dollar cap? Some things to consider here. What happens if the ERM quits? Is ZOMG in the same place it was before he was hired with lack of support? Also, what happens if there's a breakdown in the relationship or an impasse between ZOMG committee members and ZF?
Well, I'll start this one off. I mean, I think it's an absolute fair criticism that the foundation did not provide enough support to ZMG during the early months and really until recently. I think that was partly because the expectations of what ZMG was going to be doing maybe were inaccurate. there was a change in leadership with me coming in and taking over, and I rightly or wrongly prioritized certain things when perhaps I should have prioritized bringing on more staff to help support ZOMG. But I want to make it clear that we are acting in good faith. We have done what we promised to do. We have hired an ecosystem relations. In fact, we said we were going to hire a communications and ecosystem relations manager, and instead what we did was we hired 2 people into that space. We hired a head of communications and an ecosystem relations manager who has who has experience in the Zcash ecosystem and can leverage his own contacts to start doing some of the stuff that we're talking about in terms of building relationships with potential grant applicants and attracting good grant applications. So I'm hopeful that, and I appreciate that Dan has only been on board for 20 days, but I feel like he's already starting to have an impact, and I'm hopeful that those support problems that were rightfully highlighted will end up getting resolved. And I want to apologize for the fact that that it took so long. It took longer than I would have liked.
Can I also just add that Dan, the Ecosystems Relations Manager, will be the face. He's going to be the person doing that process work, a lot of the things that we've been talking about here. But behind Dan is me and Danica. Danica and I both attend every meeting. She takes notes. I'm providing other assistance behind the scenes. Every day there's something I'm working on that's related to ZOMG. So, while it is that role, there is a whole team behind that role that is also providing support, literally every day. So the continuity piece, if something was to happen, the continuity would still be there. But it's certainly a fair question. But as we talk about ZF support, it is not one individual. It's quite a few people, and it's part of our jobs, and that's not going to go away. I mean, unless something materially changes through these conversations, this is part of our daily work.
Okay. And with regards to an impasse developing between the foundation and ZOMG, I mean, we're committed to supporting, enabling ZOMG to be successful. Like, we want to see Zcash succeed, and ZOMG, as has been pointed out, is wielding the largest slice of that debt fund. So I personally absolutely want to see ZOMG be astonishingly successful. I think that perhaps some of the issues or some of the unhappiness have been about communications breakdown or a failure to communicate effectively or enough. And I think that we're moving towards a better place in that respect. But I think that there are some restrictions that we face by dint of the fact that ZOMG is under the umbrella of a 501c3 corporation, we do try to explain and detail what those restrictions mean and what the implications are, but we also try to work our way around things. So, like, I think the initial suggestion that I may have kind of pushed back against was that ZOMG hire its own staff. Well, that's not provided for within ZIP 1014, and I think it's one solution to an underlying problem that we've figured out a different way to resolve using the RFI process. So, I think that there's definitely a willingness on our part that where there are problems, there are obstacles to ZOMG being successful, we're absolutely willing to bend over backwards to make things work. There are just some situations where we are restricted, but I think with the RFI process, with because there's another one that's just escaped my mind. Oh, the staggered elections approach. I think we've got this idea that we put forward that some of the ZOMG members draw straws after 6 months and stand down, and then we'll hold a new round of elections, and that way we'll kick off. From thenceforth we'll have 6 monthly elections, so we won't have that wholesale turnover that we're potentially facing this time.
I wanted to just kind of talk about what Jack was just saying. I agree that those systems are being put in place to make things easier to address the question of what if there's a disagreement between Zcash Foundation and ZOMG, or like an impasse. I think, frankly, Zcash Foundation is going to do great this time. I think in the past they haven't, for reasons outside of everyone's control for the most part. But they're doing better now. And I'll say this: I'm kind of being warm and fuzzy about this and a little bit oh, I really trust Jack. I really trust Alex. I've seen what they've done. But at the end of the day, I do that with the confidence in knowing that they will absolutely fold to pressure from the community if they're being egregious in any way. They're absolutely held accountable by the community. And if I'm on ZOMG again, I have zero. I love Jack. I love Alex. I love other Zcash Foundation people, but I have no qualms about going against them to say ZOMG can't be under Zcash Foundation anymore. You haven't held up your end of the deal. There were problems. You said you were going to fix them. They haven't been fixed. I think there's multiple people who are willing to go to bat against the Zcash Foundation should that occur, and there would be a lot of community support that would pretty much cripple them to a point where they'd have to give up control. So I'm not sweating it, but I can see where there would be that concern given the past history of Zcash Foundation, and also the plans we're having to put in place now.
Yeah, and I think I mentioned this in one of my forum posts. It is entirely possible that the plans that we're putting into action don't work, and that they don't do enough to make ZOMG successful. In which case, as Jason mentioned, we've got that escape valve of allowing ZOMG to then vote and say, actually, this isn't working. We need to go back to the drawing board. We need to reevaluate this, because it just may be that the restrictions that are placed on ZOMG by dint of the fact that they are under a 501c3, aren't conducive to ZOMG's success. The one thing I would say is that those restrictions would continue to apply even if it were an independent 501c3 entity, or indeed if it were a nonprofit entity in many of the likely jurisdictions that it would potentially be set up in around the world.
Does anybody have a plan B if that occurs?
If what occurs? If
after 4 months Jack pulls the committee members and they say that the structure is unworkable.
It would be an iterative process to pause the grant, or here's what it would be in my mind if I was dictator. Pause the grants, have a set deadline, and set up a committee to form a new process, put that process to a community vote through a ZIP, get that amended, and get 1014 slashed, no longer applicable.
Okay, so we could do that as part of this committee, right? Just to have the plan in place for if that occurs.
We could just plan. We could plan for the worst. Sure, I guess.
Okay.
Great. I have a different base approach, which would not be surprising. I think we've tried a year of what we've tried, and I think I'm looking at the number 2 in Jason's list. The first question is in number 2 is, should we be able to support ourselves independently, subject to a monetary cap? I think we should. Since a year of whatever we've been doing hasn't worked, and I understand that the ZF was through a transitory phase, I think it's worth trying a version of ourselves that has more autonomy, that has some sort of monetary cap attached to whatever we want to do. And we can do the same of maybe after 4 months, we decide it's not workable. And all of this taking into account the fact that the money is coming out of ZF, and so there are certain restrictions. What this autonomous amount of money being available can do for us is that the default answer to what we want to do is a yes, subject to legal requirements. And kind of ZF's role is to help us get to how to get yes to being executed. Sorry, that was very convoluted. I think in the past, there's things like, oh, we want to create a website. Oh no, let's wait for the ERM. Oh, our ERM's not going to be on board or fully on ramped for another 3 months. Can we hire somebody in between, because it is 3 to 4 months of in between? And in the meantime, the things that are broken remain broken. And the answer, the response we got was, no, let's just wait. I would prefer a world where the answer is, yeah, sure, let's do it, subject to it being outside of the bounds of a 501c3, what it can do. So it's both a financial ability to do something and also a mental orientation of these 5 very capable people have been elected. Let's assume that what they want to do makes sense, and let's support that, subject to legal requirements.
Jack, what's your thought of that?
I wasn't aware that there was a problem with the website. That's entirely news to me. So maybe that's part of the symptom of the communications aspect. But one thing I would say is that I think that with the RP model in place, that's a great example of how you could say, right, we're going to issue an RFP for just like the Zcash Foundation has recently done. We've issued an RFP to get a new website for the foundation. So I think it would be a good trial run of the RFP process to say, right, we need a website for ZOMG. We're not happy with it being under the Zcash Foundation website. We want to have our own separate, and we're going to issue an RFP to get companies to come in and bid for that work. Alex, correct me if you think that this is off base, but
no, I think, absolutely. I mean, totally accurate. I guess just a clarification, Michelle. So when you say there's limitations of being under ZF as a 501c3, and with a little more autonomy, you'd be able to somehow not be under that, not have those same constraints. Was I misunderstanding?
No. I've been in a lot of, not personally, but I have been in a lot of lawsuits and countersuits. So I totally understand we need to do things by the book. But I think what this idea of autonomy and having a sequestered pot of funds that we're allowed to kind of spend from will allow us more freedom to do things that we think are possible. Right now, I think the relationship and since we started working more closely with ZF, the relationship has more been one of permission rather than just make sure we're not breaking any laws. And that has been a blocker, not just for me. I think everyone on the committee feels this tension, right? We just want to get, like all of us volunteers, right? Anything we think of is not for personal gain. And then having like go to dad for permission, like ZF for permission, it just feels very constraining. And I think it's demotivating as well. Like, we have 2 people on the call at least who are potential committee members. I suspect they would also want to really be a steward of our dev fund and do the best they can with the autonomy that they, I suppose, expect when they're running for a completely separate committee.
Yeah, I just want to
maybe they want to chime in at this time.
I just want to be clear on one thing real quick. The restriction is less the 501(c)(3). It's more ZIP 1014, right? So you could amend ZIP 1014 to allow for that a little autonomy. So, I mean, do you agree with that?
There are 2 barriers for us to put down. Only one can be put down. So I think the ZIP 14 can be adjusted. You can remove that barrier. But the 501c3 is the one we cannot. And I agree with that position.
Yes, we can.
So,
But
so I
that's a
would say
topic. It's a
that
larger scope for a later conversation.
So DC had his hand up, I think.
Yeah, so I think zooming out, the puzzle we're trying to solve here is that we've got this committee which is tasked with distributing the largest share of the dev fund as effectively as possible. That's the mandate. I was incredibly pleased to see when the first OMG was elected, the caliber of the people that the community, well, one that ran and that the community elected. These are some all-star people. And I was incredibly displeased to see that when re-election started coming into focus, that 4 out of 5 of these people said, thanks, but no thanks. And the feedback I'm getting from them is that they don't feel that they're empowered to be effective. And so I think it's incumbent upon us, and I'm speaking right now as a community member, not as an employee of ECC, but it's incumbent upon us to reflect and see what might we change. And I think for that first year, perhaps there was insufficient autonomy. So the extreme form of more autonomy is, okay, make it a multi-sig, make it a DAO, make it sovereign to the internet or headquartered in Wyoming or fill in the blank. And maybe that's a bit too far. But I do think Michelle's suggestion here that there be some sort of discretionary budget subject to the 501c3 restrictions, but that gives OMG some autonomy for figuring out how to allocate resources to make themselves more effective it's a reasonable ask and one that we should certainly try. And now if we need to make an amendment to ZIP 1014 to do that, then let's propose it and see what the community thinks. But I am absolutely positively willing to take the risk that there's a little bit of additional risk of capture or a little bit of extra risk of waste to give this group some more autonomy.
So this actually, oh, go ahead.
I'll go on record and say that for a while now, I think all 5 members have been relatively detached versus before. And I think it's this demotivational situation we're in that is driving this amount of detachment, which is entirely not ideal.
So I think we need to delve into what exactly is required, because we just had one example of being able to create their own website, which I've highlighted can be dealt with through the RP process. So I think we need to delve into exactly what it is that ZOMG wants to do, or what problems they're looking to solve, what requirements they're looking to fulfill. Because I think there's a difference between putting forward a proposed solution and describing the problem. So I think, if, and to relate this to the example that we've just heard, the proposed solution might be that ZOMG has its own budget to go and hire a web developer. But that's not the problem. The problem is that ZOMG wants to create its own website. And there's another solution, which is to go and issue an RFP to attract web development companies to come in and say, yeah, we can build a website for you. And that then becomes a grant that comes out of the ZOMG budget, or the ZOMG slice. So I think we need to zero in on what the problems are that we're looking to solve, and then figure out, can they be solved within ZIP 1014, or do we need to make wholesale changes? The other thing I would say is that to my mind, there's 2 ways of thinking about ZOMG. There's the way I've always thought about it, and I'm not necessarily this is the right way, but it just happens to be the way that I've thought about it, is that the purpose of ZOMG is to fund other teams and organizations to join or build their presence within the Zcash ecosystem to diversify influence and control away from ECC and the Zcash Foundation. There seems to be another school of thought which says that ZOMG itself needs to become that organization which then pulls power or diversifies power and control away from ECC and ZF. And I think that's something that's worth debating a bit, and talking about, because they're two different mindsets. And sometimes I think, you know, upon reflection and upon looking back at some of the discussions and notes that I've taken, you know, following meetings with ZOMG in the past, I think that some of the frustration may have been because we were talking about things from two different perspectives. So, for example, there were times when I said, you know, we can't do that. To do that would require making a change to ZIP 1014, but you know, you should feel free to propose such a change. Whereas I think what some of the committee heard was just a blanket no. We're not going to, you know, we're opposed to that. We're not going to let that happen. So yeah, I think there's some higher level conceptual things that are worth discussing, aside from the sort of operational challenges that we've been facing and hopefully are resolving. But you know, I think, you know, as I said earlier, it's entirely possible that in order for this slice of the dev fund to be deployed effectively, that there needs to be a change in structure. But I think, you know, that's a slightly higher level discussion but I think it's worth having.
So Jack, I think ideologically, over time, I would love to see additional entities evolve that have power and control and contribute meaningfully to the Zcash ecosystem. Near term, I think we need to crawl, walk, run. The example you used about like needing a website and writing an RFP, like it gave me seizures because it sounds so bureaucratic and so slow. I'm instead envisioning a world where ZOMG has a budget to put Hudson on a plane to go to Berlin or Miami and rub shoulders with a bunch of hotshot developers and see what they're working on and imagine, you know, how might they contribute to the Zcash ecosystem, or how might Zcash solve problems elsewhere in the ecosystem. So do I want to give them a blank check to go just squander a bunch of money? No, but I trust Hudson, like I trust ML and the other members of OMG to have quite a bit longer leash to go see what they can do. These are very influential, powerful, intelligent people in our ecosystem. And I think we would do well to give them more time and resources to see what benefits they can bring to the table. And then we can reflect as a community, was it worth it? Should we keep doing this? Should we make changes to it?
I also wanted to chime in, Jack. I personally, I really don't care about a new entity or like full autonomy. I don't want to deal with the overhead. It's too complicated, I think. But what I don't want is the sense that we, you know, our hands are tied about everything. So I think there is a kind of a three-path menu here. One is full autonomy, which is what you mentioned as the second approach. Then there is full dependence, which is what I feel we're at right now. And I would prefer some sort of kind of collaboration, interdependence. I don't know if that's the right word, but something that's not full dependence, which is what I feel like we are at right now, and full independence, which is, I don't think a panel of volunteers is suitable for.
I think though, like the way DC just said that, defining autonomy and defining what that means, because I would agree, and I think most of the community would agree that what DC just said is a good use of time. It's a good way to utilize the people on the committee, but the potentially right to go really aggressively be out there, aggressively be marketing and talking about the work that's going on and soliciting people to come in. Like I get that. But then there's the operational side where like doing an RFP for a website is a mundane thing that has to happen, and we're more than happy to take that on in cooperation with ZOMG. So I do think defining what that autonomy means, and if we're talking about those high level things, then like let's talk about that. But if we're talking about like ZOMG's ability to do a website, we're not going to stand in the way of that. We're going to say, how do we support it? Let's make this happen. Let's do it. So I do think it's that definition that's really important.
The moderate level of autonomy I mentioned, I think would come into play, for example, with that website question. I don't want to overly zoom in into website because there will be other things that come up at the same level. But for example, some amount of autonomy would have instead gone down the path of, we need a website. Okay, how do you want me to help? Rather than, oh, we thought about it and we think it's better to wait for this guy to join and then he'll figure out how many months later is that? That's the mindset shift that I'm talking about, where we can decide what we want and you will tell us if we cannot because 501c3 constraints.
I just want to say that I don't recognize what you've just described. The situation that you've described, ML, with us, you're implying that the foundation refused to let the ZOMG create a website. I don't recognize that. Maybe it happened before I arrived, but I want to be clear. I want to be clear for the public because I feel like an accusation is being leveled. I do not recognize that.
Hey, Jack. I think you appreciate the point, though. The point is that people like this all-star team of committee members need creative space to operate and do their thing, right? They can't be constricted, and it sounds like that's what happened. Like if you read ML's post fighting a wildfire, the language that she uses is like straitjacket and baby's bib to describe the relationship between the foundation and ZOMG. And my fear is that when smart, capable people feel too constricted, they become less likely to want to experiment, explore new ideas, connect with their work at a personal level. They feel frustrated, they lose energy and commitment, and then their motivation evaporates, and then they leave. And that's why you have 4 of the 5 current members choosing not to run for re-election. So I think the solution should be to trend towards increasing autonomy over time. And you're right, we need to figure out how to define that.
Yeah, and I would just reiterate that the RFPs and the RFIs are intended to make that possible immediately, rather than having to wait to change it.
But is there red tape there? Like, do they fill out the RFP and then it needs to be approved by ZF?
No, and again, though, we're just getting started with this process. What we've discussed is, providing the template, providing the feet on the ground to get all the work done, having ZOMG provide the statement of work, a huge amount of input on the statement of work, how it's going to run. I mean, there's a ton of work on the ZOMG side as well, but the administrative part, again, the mundane, it is being done by ZF, and we're doing as much as we can to remove those non-value adds. And that's the goal. Again, we're just getting started with this, and not to say we need, months and months and months and years. I mean, we want to get rolling. We want to get this done. It's a tough time to be having that conversation as we're in this transitory period. But the goal certainly is to tap into ZOMG's expertise, passion, why they're on that committee to begin with. But we're doing as much of that legwork, mundane stuff as possible. That's the goal.
Yeah. I totally understand where ML is coming from. I empathize because I have similar feelings. And I think like the elephant in the room kind of that no one's really directly addressing is that on the forums, various people across all Zcash organizations, chat rooms, people in ZOMG, they don't really trust the ZF and Jack because like they've made mistakes in the past or underperformed, et cetera, depending on who you're talking to. So just Jack, as clearly as you can put it, since there is lost trust, like there's not, or I'll put it this way, before a system like this RFI-RFP system can work, there has to be some trust, and that has to be built over time. And hopefully the new ZOMG will bring that. If I'm there, that's what I'm going to be aiming toward. But how, with your leadership style, do you feel you're going to accomplish that?
So I think that better communication, I think, is essential because it's clear to me that there hasn't been enough either in terms of quantity or quality communication between the ZF leadership and ZOMG. Misunderstandings like this idea that we've stood in the way of ZOMG creating its own website. That's the sort of thing that I feel can be resolved through communication. I think also that there's probably a need for ZOMG to work together to come up with a common position, because there's a vast difference between some of the ideas and thoughts that have been expressed by individuals and what I've heard from other members of ZOMG privately. So yeah, I think that one of the and this is one of the reasons why I suggested having, you know, after a certain amount of time, having ZOMG as an entity vote on whether it feels things are working or not. You know, I think there's a difference between what individual members of ZOMG think and what the consensus or sentiment of ZOMG as a committee is. So I think that's something that I would you know, try to elicit more in order to help guide myself and hopefully as well the community's view on how ZOMG is functioning.
Oh, can you hear me? I cut out. Okay.
We can hear you now.
Yeah, I totally understand the sentiment. It's a real hard ask to have a constant, or even, well, maybe not even constant, but just have ZOMG as a collective come together on a decision on certain issues. So in this particular case, I think it would actually be irresponsible to have ZOMG come together and say, Zcash Foundation, you're doing wrong, when you at one time, if not currently, employ one of the ZOMG members. That would basically be them agreeing to yell at their boss. And Sean's a really nice soul anyway, so I'm not going to have him, you know, come in if we're trying to do anything that would make it seem like we're being negative. You know what I mean? So really, and for this, at least for this ZOMG committee, that couldn't happen. The next one, maybe. So I'm just saying,
yeah,
you know, temper expectations for the types of people that you'll be interacting with, because, yeah, individual stuff matters. And yeah.
Yeah. So one thing I would say about Sean is you know, we have never sought to influence Sean's decision making in the context of ZOMG. You know, like that he in actual fact, under ZIP 1014, he doesn't fulfill the criteria to fill the you know, to fill that single seat that is allocated to both organizations, to both ECC and ZF. And just, you know, again, I want to reiterate that my overriding and overarching view on ZOMG is that its independence in terms of decision making is what's really, really important. Its ability to receive a grant, and assuming that it's legal and doesn't, you know, risk you know, a legal catastrophe, and to be able to direct those funds, I think is what's most important. And I'd also, you know, point out that there is a potential avenue there for ZOMG to, so if ZOMG, by dint of restrictions, whether by ZIP 1014 or 501c3 status, you know, feels it isn't able to do things that it wants to achieve, there is scope there for it to fund another organization to do those things, and to eventually, if that goes well, and, you know, back to David's you know, point about crawl, walk, run, ZIP 1014 also allows for there to be a permanent allocation of a slice of the major grant slice of the debt fund to a grant recipient, for that to be baked into the protocol. So, you know, I think that there's a lot of potential that exists for ZOMG to achieve the sort of things that we're talking about to further its mission. And, you know, I you know, again, you know, having these discussions, I think, is good, because it brings out those frustrations, and also surfaces these potential solutions that are already there, already exist, and are already available.
And I'm not going to take up any more time except this last thought, and then I'm going to pass it over to, I think it was ML or Zooko who had their hand raised or something. But just as a suggestion from what I said earlier, you all hired Winifred, I think. I hope I'm pronouncing her name right. I've only met her once, but my impression of her is that she is an amazing communicator. And I think that was something that was kind of a blank space for Zcash Foundation as people left last year and then, the year before and then joined this year. So I really hope that she gets heavily utilized to kind of bring back a lot of transparency and hopefully more trust to ZF. So yeah, and then I don't know who is next to talk.
Zooko, go ahead.
What Jack just said segues into what I've been thinking about. I've been really quiet because people are having disagreements about whether to improve things by giving ZOMG more autonomy or more support or both or something else. And I'm pretty happy to see that, like, I know almost everyone present, and I know that they're all high integrity and good minds. And they have direct experience at all that, and I don't, so I don't have an opinion about all that. But what Jack said segues to what I have been thinking about, which is that while making decisions or presenting a proposal to the community to approve or whatever about improving the effectiveness while maintaining the good governance of ZOMG, there's also this other effect, which is trending toward or trending away from more decentralization of Zcash as a whole. So what I do have a lot of direct experience with, including recently, is consensus rules, the crypto industry and all the myriad players they're in, and a variety of regulatory and political things that are going on, regimes. And so I just want to say to, I guess, the broader Zcash community, as well as to this committee, that currently there are 2 independent organizations that support Zcash, and that's too few. And it is very risky, increasingly risky because of the increasing unpredictability of the USA regulatory regime. And also, both of those 2 happen to be under the jurisdiction of IRS and USA. So that's 1. That's also too few. Now, not that this committee is the right place to fix that, I don't think, but the things that we're doing here might make it easier or harder for the community to fix that going forward. That's all. Other than that, I think this is going great, and I'm just going to go back to being quiet.
I just want to say that I agree that in an ideal world, it would be great to see the major grants slice end up bit by bit every 6 months or every year being a little bit being chopped off to go to another independent entity, a little bit being chopped off to go to another independent entity, until there are multiple, there's like a cloud of entities that all support Zcash and all, and therefore the power, like I think Hudson, the point you made about trust has to do with power. There's a perception, I think, that the foundation or I have some sort of power over ZOMG, and that's actually, I would say, not true. What's true is that our hands are tied incredibly tightly in many respects. But Dan highlighted the decentralist Dan highlighted something that Eran said in the forums, which is that the purpose of ZOMG is not to be a third entity; it's to attract and fund the third and the fourth and the fifth entities. I'm fully supportive of that, and ZIP 1014 allows for that. It literally allows for there to be a permanent allocation of a slice of the dev fund to a grant recipient.
I swear I memorized that whole entire document, but I don't remember that part, so I'm going to look it up.
I'm going to look it up right now because I could be wrong.
That sounds very interesting.
In which case, it would be embarrassing.
Relevant to my interests.
You're both right. Actually, it's there, but there's a deadline at the activation of the ZIP. So the ability to permanently redirect has now expired, but the spirit is still there.
Ah,
Intriguing.
I didn't realize there was a demo.
Well, that sounds like something for the Zcash community to look at.
Actually, it might have been simplified away in the transition from 10.12 to 10.14. So maybe I wrote
You have to load up GitHub history.
Well, we have all the history and brains available on this panel in front of me to figure it out.
But
No,
that said,
it's-
I mean, the spirit here is what's important. And if the zone makes the decision that there is now this entity, you know, a new organization somewhere, maybe not in the US, that is perfectly positioned to do the right things, it can just make the decision to fund this on an ongoing basis. And yes, the ZIP has some provisions for ongoing review, but in a good world, these will be just checking the box every 6 or 12 months and letting that organization be. Now, that doesn't completely solve, of course, the 501c3 obligations and the US jurisdiction, but it goes a long way towards creating the autonomy for that entity.
You guys see this here, the direct grant option?
Yeah, that's great. Thanks for pointing that out.
I think that prior to each network upgrade, I think that this is an option before each network upgrade.
Nice. That's very interesting.
You catch the
And I
changes.
think-
Every network upgrade, nice.
And I think what Eran was saying sounds like a really plausible process, but I think maybe we've wandered far afield. I thought that Jason's agenda for this was improving the effectiveness and maintaining the governance over ZOMG, but I think what Dodger and Eran just said is very interesting. Let's get on with that at some point.
Okay. I wanted to check in with wobbzz and see if he had anything to add or anything, any comments or questions.
Yeah, hey everyone. So ZOMG Candidate. Yeah, this has been more, I would say, a fact-finding mission for me, being able to hear directly from the sources, you know, current ZOMG as well as Zcash Foundation to see sort of what the barriers have been. And, you know, while I am cautiously optimistic about the changes that have been made recently, you know, hiring the ecosystems relations manager, the communications manager, things like what DC talked about, treating the ZOMG more like a venture kind of organization, having that autonomy to be able to, or, you know, at least the financial ability to, you know, attend conferences, spend more of their time beyond just the 15 hours a month reviewing and approving grants, to actually be able to, you know, work with other organizations throughout the crypto ecosystem. I think that is what is really going to start attracting more value to Zcash and, you know, more spreading more use of Zcash throughout the ecosystem. So, you know, it'll be really interesting to see how these changes work out. I'm not super excited about RFPs and things like that in general, but I understand why, you know, mainly because I think that it's a lot of additional work and creates additional time to complete a task, or introduces an additional amount of time that's necessary to complete a task. But, you know, we're working within the current construct, and also understand that amending ZIP 1014 is a very significant lift. So yeah, that's kind of where I'm at.
Okay, so I think that, you know, one thing there's relative consensus on is this idea that the current structure is too constricting, and that we really need to, like, you know, revisit what does it mean? How, when we say independence and autonomy, what are we saying? So maybe for the next meeting we can do that, and from there we can, you know, figure out if there's an amendment to ZIP 1014, whether it be modest or whether it incrementally, you know, allows ZOMG more independence that we can, that would be worth putting forth to the community and going through the Zcash governance process.
Or I would say we may discover that there are alternatives to that there are solutions that can be enacted within the current ZIP 1014.
Yeah, and I think going back to the autonomy thing, we've all multiple people have brought up on this conversation. What does that autonomy, what additional autonomy does the ZOMG need that is not being satisfied? If you're feeling detracted about not wanting to participate in ZOMG, what additional things would you like to do that are not currently being addressed, or that you don't think the current changes would enable you to do within the amount of time that you would like to do it? I think I would love to see conversation about that amongst the current ZOMG, and then also shared with the community.
I would agree. Yes, we need more color. However, I think, the people on this screen are not going to be the full panel, or even at all a part of the panel. I think the next panel will have their own desires, projects they want to do. I don't think we can just say we need a website, we need a, AMA, somebody to organize that. I don't think we can. It's almost like if I'm an investor and I go to an early stage startup and I say, show me your revenue projections. Too early stage, I don't know. Nobody can tell that far in advance what needs to be done. So I think, therefore, that little bit more autonomy, I think, for me, is patently obvious and required, because we just don't know ahead of us what needs to be done. The website is just one thing, right? There could be tons of other ideas as more and better ideas surface and more things happen in crypto that we need to keep up with. And sorry, while I have the mic, I think it's important to Jack. So I want to say that the ZF did not come to us and say, no, we will not give you a website. I think it was a lot more subtle than that, right? It was kind of us, I think, with our first meeting with Alex, giving him a couple of things we wanted him to check in with Jack on, and ZF on. And I think a number of those things were rejected in a way that was surprisingly kind of swift for us. And I think that led to additional amounts of disappointment. And the email trail starts from the 28th of June. You can look it up. That email was not motivating for a number of us. So just wanted to say, Jack did not say no website. Okay.
So Don't Be Evil was in chat, and before we go, they wanted both ML and myself to talk one more time about the ideal structure for ZOMG that enables effectiveness for ZOMG. Did you want to go first, ML?
I don't understand what structure it means here. Do you mean like number of people, or what autonomy looks like?
What autonomy looks like is more near what they're asking.
Hang on, sorry, but Don't Be Evil, can you clarify on chat maybe?
Oh, on chat, yeah, I bet they can, I hope. And while they're typing, I can kind of give a little bit of my answer. So to make it short, I think in the short term, we should elect new ZOMG, get grants rolling again, as they've been going. Or sort of, not to say that they've stopped or anything, but like get grants going with the new team. And then really hone in on getting the RFI process going with Zcash Foundation, working with Dan, Central Stan, to start to get the word out a little bit, work on a little bit more with communications. That's kind of the immediate, like 4 months after ZOMG gets elected. And then after that, 4 to 6 months, reassess where we're at. If there needs to be like an immediate need for a lot of autonomy, have something like this again. If there doesn't, improve upon the things Zcash Foundation has given us and use their resources. 1 year from now, or maybe 8 months from now, assess how we can be more separate and autonomous in general, just for the good of being separate and autonomous. So yeah. So, new nonprofit or help solve the problems or a DAO. It's not clear what needs to be changed. So I've mostly been in the Ethereum community during my time in crypto, and there are multiple companies right now that are going full DAO. And what I mean by that is they are firing all their employees. They're closing down their company structure under traditional US law, and they're becoming a piece of code that pays out through voting on chain that gives tokens out to the employees that are not under any contract. And then startups are coming up to give benefits to DAO employees. Opolis is the main one. So that's kind of what's happening there. Zcash can't do that unless they want to use Ethereum stuff, because you can't build a DAO on Zcash right now with the programmatic capabilities. That'd be really cool if they used Ethereum stuff. I mean, I think Ethereum and Zcash are best friends, so I'd say go for it. But either way, so yeah, reassess in 8 months what it means to be more autonomous, and yeah, just kind of do check-ins every few months, see how things are going, be really open about it, maybe have it be a public call.
Should I jump in?
Oh yeah, go right ahead.
So I think just to recap for whoever's watching this, Don't Be Evil asked, what's the ideal structure for ZOMG? For example, new nonprofit organization or a DAO structure. It's not clear what needs to be changed for the problems that are being discussed. In my opinion, the structure doesn't really need to change. We can be the panel we've been, and we can rely on ZF for administration. Funds should flow through them, etc. I think what needs to be changed is we need to be allocated our own budget to do things that we think is suitable. And we need to basically be assumed to have our own authority on making decisions, subject to the constraints of being under a 501c3. Plus, we need to look at compensation so that we attract and retain talent that wants to stay on and is motivated and feels like because they're getting a good paycheck per month, they don't kind of just dribble off and treat it as volunteer time. It's charity time. I go to the soup kitchen when I have, when I have time to go to the soup kitchen. So I think these are not structural.
Are there members that would have rerun if compensation was increased?
I don't believe so.
Okay.
I can't speak for them, but like from at least from the forum post, what they said, the ones who said they're not rerunning. ML, do you agree?
No, can I say something? Nobody said that was, nobody publicly said that was their reasoning, but that's a really difficult sort of counterfactual for someone to imagine. Like, yeah. What if my family and my career were different? That's a whole different universe.
Yeah.
I think for me, it's I may be the outlier here. I'm constantly having to trade off time, and 1 year of doing this, very happily doing so, is enough. I think going forward, it would feel like a very strong tension if this were the kind of trade-off I had to make for 15 hours every month.
I mean, sorry.
Plus, I don't think, I think a number of people on the panel are kind of just probably can retire. I feel like other candidates who want to apply of high quality, including myself, are not yet at that level of where we can, just donate an infinite amount of time per month.
Yeah, I think it's important that this does not become a barrier for good candidates who may not be relevant.
My view on this, and again, I want to emphasize that this is just what my view has been. I'm open to hearing alternative viewpoints. My view has been that the sort of people that we want to attract to serve on ZOMG are probably the sort of people for whom 15 hours a month is probably almost too much to ask them to take out of their busy lives. And the value that I certainly feel we should be looking for people bringing to ZOMG is, you know, a deep level of experience and knowledge of crypto and or the Zcash ecosystem in general. You know, that ability to make informed decisions about grants and to, you know, to not having to not need to kind of re-educate themselves every time a grant application comes through. And also, you know, I think that people who can leverage their networks to say, oh yeah, it'd be cool if we had, if we, you know, had someone who could advise us on cross-chain, you know, token issuance. Who I happen to know 3 guys who are experts in that. Let me see if they'd be interested in you know, giving us their advice. But you know, there seems to be a fairly you know, a consistent you know, set of voices who are saying, no, we need to hire people and pay them for their time and more than just this sort of, you know, 50 hours a month, which by the way, I would hope to actually reduce by taking more of the administrative burden and more of the mundane work away from ZOMG. So I think that's also something that's worth discussing. I think that's a sort of high level issue that's worth delving into.
All right, guys, it's 2:32, so we've gone 2 minutes over time. I mean, I assume people have other commitments. Should we call it wrapped?
Thank you so
Thanks,
much
Jason.
for organizing, Jason.
This was awesome. Oh, sorry to interrupt you, Zooko, but good job, Jason.
Yeah, thank you
I
very much.
wasn't interrupting. We were saying the same thing as each other at the same time.
All right, thanks everybody for your time.
So-
Appreciate it.